As someone who's worked in finance for over 7 years, I want to share 7 unique strategies that I've learned that allowed me to save 73% of my income. The first strategy is applying the Pareto principle to my money. This is a concept coined in 1906, and in simple terms, it means that for many outcomes, roughly 80% of the consequences come from 20% of the causes. For instance, I've noticed that I finished about 80% of the tasks on my to-do list in the morning, when I'm most focused and productive, which is during the first 20% of my day. And for the remainder of the day, I'm much more likely to procrastinate. I'll come across something really interesting and go down a rabbit hole, like watching videos about how mammoths still walked the earth when the Great Pyramids were being built. Which means I should prioritize the most critical task in the morning when I'm in flow state to make the best use of my time and effort. Surprisingly, the same principle can be applied to personal finance, where 80% of your total expenses come from around 20% of your expense categories. For example, if my monthly expenses were $3,200 broken down by these expense categories, I can see that about 80% of my total expenses, or $2,400 of it, comes from 20% of my expense categories: rent/mortgage and dining out. So if I wanted to save money, it would be a lot more efficient and impactful to focus on cutting the cost of these two expense categories that contribute to most of my expenses, rather than focusing on these other ones. Try breaking down your expenses and identify which 20% of your expense categories contribute to 80% of your total expenses. Then start thinking about how you can cut those costs. You'd be surprised by what you can come up with. Can you refinance your mortgage, downsize, or change your car insurance providers? All these changes will save you a lot more than just cutting out a $5 iced coffee. The next strategy that helps me save most of my income is spending money to save money. And I know this sounds really confusing, but just hear me out. We're all limited by this concept called our savings ceiling. You can only save as much as you earn. Meaning, if you earn $5,000 a month, the most you can ever save is quite literally $5,000, and that's if you don't buy anything. And the only way to increase that savings ceiling is by making more money. But if you work a 9 to 5, or you have a family, or in my case, you worked a 8 to 8, sometimes a 8 to 11, you're limited by how much time you have in a day. But the reality is there are only 2 ways you can make more money. 1, you can either trade your time for money, or 2, you can trade money for time. For instance, I started making content and videos while working at my full-time job. I would spend many late nights, well, technically mornings, after work, researching, scripting, filming, and video editing, just to publish one video. And after months of only sleeping 3 to 4 hours a night, I finally decided that it wasn't worth my health and time to be a loyal member of Team No Sleep. So I hired a video editor to effectively buy my time back so I could focus on other things like building my actual business and sleeping, while also working in 8 to 8 to prevent burnout and, not die. And this decision to spend more money allowed me to increase my income, lift my savings ceiling, and ultimately save more money. So whether it's fixing the sink, doing your own oil change, or mowing the lawn, time equals money, and always doing something yourself might not be the best use of your time. Next, I realized that saving money becomes easier once you create a system or habits around it so that you don't need to rely on willpower to save. It just becomes sort of second nature. The problem is the barrier to entry of just getting started and building out that system is the hardest part. As Newton once said, it requires more effort to get an object moving from rest than to keep it moving. Dog. But 2 things that really helped me take the first step and stop overthinking all this is 1, having someone to hold you accountable, and 2, having a structured step-by-step roadmap to follow. Which is why I'm hosting the largest free 5-day savings challenge on October 1st. It's called the $1,000 Savings Challenge, and you can join for free with the link below. Thousands of people are joining, and we're all gonna learn to save together and hold each other accountable. So whether you're saving up for a dream vacation, a down payment on a house, or an emergency fund, stop overthinking and just focus on taking the first step with the link below. And again, it's 100% free to join, but space is limited. So if you click on the link and it says it's no longer available, then unfortunately we already reached capacity. Next, one of the biggest reasons for my financial success is I follow the 2-step TG strategy. The T stands for tracking expenses and budgeting, because if you don't know how much money you need, your bank account is like a ship with holes in it. You'll never know what you should spend more on or cut back on. Budgeting helps you find the holes and fix them before your ship sinks. And it's pretty straightforward to get started. Like, I created this budget tracker which automatically generates reports of my income and my spending, and this allows me to easily learn what's working, what's not working, where to cut back on, and what to save for what truly matters. Which leads me to the G in the TG strategy, which is setting financial goals. Like, where do you want to go in life? How much do you need? And just having a financial goal alone is going to set you ahead of a lot of people because it forces you to switch your mindset from short-term thinking to long-term thinking. Without a financial goal, you're just aiming in the dark and hoping for the best. For instance, one of my first really big financial goals was to build an 8-month cash buffer to cover my living expenses so I could quit my full-time job and really just bet on myself. And since I had a specific number in mind, I was able to break it down into manageable steps with monthly, weekly, and daily saving goals. And it kind of became like this game for me where I would try to hit my goals and keep the saving streak going. But it wasn't always easy. I've come to realize that when you grow up without money, you tend to build up a lot of financial baggage and trauma that negatively impacts you later in life. What I think is really helpful is therapy, which can give you the strategies to work through this. That's why I'm excited to talk about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy more affordable and accessible. Finding a therapist can be tough, especially when you're limited to the options in your area. BetterHelp is a platform that makes finding a therapist easier because it's online, it's remote, and by filling out a few questions, BetterHelp can match you to a professional therapist in as little as a few days. It's easy to sign up and get matched. Just check out the link below. It's betterhelp.com/Vincent Chan. Clicking that link supports the channel, but more importantly, gets you 10% off your first month of BetterHelp. And because finding a therapist is a little like dating, if you don't really fit with your therapist, you can easily switch to a new therapist at no additional cost, without stressing about insurance or who's in your network. If you ever went through or are going through a hard time, consider online therapy with BetterHelp. Click the link in the description or visit betterhelp.com/Vincent Chan. Thanks again to BetterHelp for supporting this video. Next, I had a phase in my life where I was just obsessed with buying things. Clothes, watches, video games, and it was getting really bad. And then I learned about the Parkinson's law. It's a psychological concept that basically says work expands to fill all available time. Like I remember in school, right? If a teacher told me that I had to write an essay on how lemons are not a naturally occurring fruit, but actually a cross between this and that fruit, and it was due in 2 weeks, I would take the full 2 weeks to complete it. I procrastinated a lot and I would definitely finish it, but I took a lot of breaks in between. But if the teacher told me the assignment was due in 4 days, you best bet I'd be very efficient and finish it in 4 days. Which is why the saying is, diamonds grow under pressure. Surprisingly, the same principle applies when it comes to money. Subconsciously or not, your spending can expand to fill all available money you have because you will never run out of things to buy if you let it. Which is what I struggled with. For instance, if you make 65K a year and then you switch jobs and you start earning 100K a year, you might start thinking, cheerio, I now have 35K more to treat myself with. Ah, what a wonderful life. But that is the literal definition of lifestyle inflation and why most Americans can't afford a $1,000 emergency expense. And what makes it worse is that your spending can technically expand to more than all your available money thanks to credit cards. But I did find the best way to break the Parkinson's law of money. And this is by forcing myself to think I earned less. For instance, if I earned 8K a month, once that 8K hits my checking account every month, I set it up so that my bank instantly moves 20% of that, or $1,600 of that, from my checking account into my high yield savings account so that I'm only left with $6,400 to spend. This trick makes you mentally take a step back and live off what you have remaining. You don't even notice it, what you're missing, because out of sight, out of mind. Next, when I first worked on Wall Street, I learned about this concept called the quarterly review. Basically, at the end of each quarter, I would sit down with my manager and evaluate my work over the past 3 months. She'd tell me what I did well, what I didn't do well on, and what we can learn and improve on for the next quarter. And I carried this idea to my own personal finances, and it changed everything. Keep in mind that this quarterly review is completely different from the TG strategy, because think of your TG strategy as if you're cooking a dish, right? You're following the recipe step by step, while the quarterly review is when you actually take a step back and you taste the dish to make sure it's going well. If it's too salty or not salty enough, then you know you done goofed somewhere and you need to pivot. So about once a quarter, I'll take a look at my budgeting tracker, or you can just gather the records from the past 3 months of your checking and credit card accounts. By the way, one of the reasons I buy nearly everything on my credit cards is that it makes reviewing my spending super easy compared to using cash. Once I have my expenses, I'll bucket them into categories like travel, education, utilities, car payments, etc. And then I'll go through each one to analyze my spending habits. Once I have a holistic picture of my quarterly spend, I'll have some key takeaways, like maybe I should spend more on education and pineapple pizza and less on movies and mugs. There's nothing like seeing the evidence of your spending in front of you to force you to question it. And once you're done with your quarterly review and you know the changes that you need to make for the next quarter, treat yourself to some pineapple pizza, because I can't even tell you how much money I save from doing this once every few months, because it's a good amount. Next is identifying the trigger rule. So in the book, Take the Stairs by Rory Vaden, he says that whenever buffaloes see a storm coming, they start charging towards it because they know that they can get it over quicker by going straight through. Humans, like you and me, I think, on the other hand, whenever we see a storm coming, we'll try to run away and avoid it. But chances are we can't run faster than a storm. The trigger rule says you need to identify the thing that's causing you to spend money. Do you tend to mindlessly buy things when you feel bored or overwhelmed or lonely? And this is gonna sound a little woo-woo, but try to ask yourself, why? For instance, for a very long time, whenever I was bored at home at night, I would just aimlessly scroll through Amazon, right? I wasn't looking for anything specific, I was just trying to kill time. But almost every time, without fail, I would find something that looked really, really cool. I knew it wasn't something that I needed, but in that moment of boredom, it seemed like the perfect distraction. Like I'd imagine how much fun it would be to have it and play with it, so I clicked buy. In my case, boredom spending was my trigger, and once I realized this, I knew that I needed to create an effective response to it. Otherwise, my apartment would be full of gadgets and gizmos, who's-its and what's-its and thingamabobs like Ariel from The Little Mermaid. So I created a 2-step action plan to distract myself. I made a list of activities I could do when I was bored, things that wouldn't cost me a penny, like playing Black Myth Wukong, rewatching Insecure for the 27th time, or randomly FaceTiming a friend on the toilet. I also set up a rule for myself that I brought up before. If I saw something that I wanted, I would add it to my not now, but later list, and then I'd wait 30 days. If by the end of the 30 days I still wanted to buy that thing, then I'll get it. But what happens about 90% of the time is that after an item has been on the list for about 2 weeks, I realize that I didn't actually want it in the first place, and it was just an impulse decision. And that leads me to something you've got to start accepting. And it's that even if you're trying your hardest to save money, sometimes you might still feel like you're not saving enough. And that might be because you don't know these 8.5 proven saving strategies. Click here to discover the 8.5 proven ways to effortlessly save money.